This is Rabbi Gail Nord, and I'd like to invite you to session 4 of our study on the book of Qoheleth, or Ecclesiastes, which we are referring to as a most unusual book. And just to remind you why we are talking about it as an unusual book, we will remember that it is unusual in the canon of Scripture, or the collection of writings in the Bible, in that it is a philosophical work written from the first person perspective of a man reflecting back on his life, which was a fairly common type of literature back in the era in which it was written, which would have been somewhere between 180 and 300 BCE. As I was reflecting on this book this week, as I find myself doing a lot these days, I was thinking about how wonderful it is that the wisdom of age is presented as looking back on life and as having something to offer to younger people, because that was very often how these wisdom type of books were used in the training of young men. So those who were wise and older and had lived experience and observation were looked on as having something to offer. Now, earlier this week, I was listening to public radio and just happened to hear a report on a young woman who has made a business for herself by selling cross-stitch handwork pieces on, I think, Etsy or something like that. And she was saying that she first learned about this form of handiwork from her grandmother, who did quite a lot of cross-stitch. But this young woman uses some kind of computerized equipment to make the patterns, and I'm not even sure what she did with some computerized equipment. But she said, well, I do this in a way that my grandmother could have never imagined or learned how to do. Now, that struck me as maybe not respectful, not accurate. Certainly her grandmother didn't grow up in an era where computerized sewing machines or whatever it is she uses were in existence. So of course she didn't know how to use them, but one could only imagine that if this young woman could figure out how to do this in the same day, her grandmother could certainly have learned how to do it. But there seems to be today a growing lack of respect for elders and for the wisdom of elders. In fact, I heard another conversation, or read about, I don't remember, I read about it, that there's a large number of television commercials that are making fun of older people, which I find to be a rather unfortunate trend. So rather than looking at our elders that way, let's look at them with respect and look at them as having something to offer, as having experience from which we can learn. I spend a lot of my time in my work with older people, and really I learn every day from their wisdom and the experience that they've had in their lives. They've gone through a lot of things, and we should listen. So anyway, now we're going to listen to Qoheleth. And we are again in a section, as we were last week, of wise sayings. Today, we're going to see quite a few things that are like contrasting something good with something bad. And a couple sections we're going to do chapter 7 and 8. A couple sections really caused quite a bit of discussion in class last week. Almost some not heated discussion, but certainly some feelings were evident as we talked about these passages. And the first one comes in the very first verse. Chapter 7, verse 1 reads, "A good name is better than fragrant oil, and the day of death than the day of birth." Now, what really caused people to question and to ponder and to think and to maybe not love this so much is a statement that the day of death is better than the day of birth. I mean, how can that be? How can death be better than birth? Well, first we have to start by looking at the first phrase here. A good name is held up as better than fragrant oil. Now, the fragrant oil is referring to the type of oil that was used in embalming, that bodies were prepared with these sorts of fragrant spices and balms before burial. So we're talking here a good name in the context with something related to burial. All right. So I think what it's saying here is we want on our day of death to die with a good name. And now this fragrant oil was very expensive. So perhaps those who had less means didn't have this kind of preparation of the body, or it was of a lesser quality or a lesser amount. But if one goes to the grave with a good name, they carry with them a fragrance that is better than this expensive oil. So then if we hold that, excuse me, in the context of the second half of the phrase, the day of death is better than the day of birth. Now, some of the rabbis over the ages, of course, have pondered this as well as we did at class. And one of the things that they said is that at the day of birth, you have your whole life ahead of you. And life is full of challenges. Of course, it's full of joys, and Qoheleth tells us that over and over again and how to find those joys. But there are many challenges and many choices and many ways that we can go astray in the course of our life. And we all have had those experiences where we can look back and say, wow, I could have made a different choice in that moment. Perhaps, hopefully not with regret, because regret is not a constructive thing, but learning from the choices that we made is very constructive. But so in the way that we could say at the day of death, we're done. We've run our course. We're going to hear that language tonight too. We've run our course in this life. We've done the race. We've gone through everything that we need to go through. And so if we go with a good name, then the day of death is better than the day of birth. And certainly if we hold that end in the context that it is only the beginning, then we can even probably feel that more profoundly, which that's another place where people certainly have disagreement. We don't know. We have no idea what happens after this life. But we're told over and over and over again that God is good, God is merciful, and that this life has a purpose, that the choices we make in this life are purposeful, and we should make good choices because that final day will come and we want to be remembered as having a good name. Now, in my career, I have presided at more funerals than I can even remember, lots and lots and lots. And I've been at some where there are very few mourners. I've been at some where the person was clearly so loved and revered and respected. And what makes a person loved and respected was not how much stuff they had. The stuff that we leave actually causes more problems among those who remain. I've seen that way too many times. But what makes for a good end is the kind of life where you spend it caring for others, doing acts of kindness and righteousness. Like Mom was always there for us. We never doubted that we were loved. She never said a bad word about anyone. Well, I don't know about that, but I've heard that many times. I mean, I think it's just a shorthand way of saying that she had a kind heart. Everyone was always welcome at our house. Our house was the place in the neighborhood where all the kids gathered. Those sort of things. That's what people remember. Now, this saying moves on to the next verse, which is kind of the same idea. It says, "It is better to go to a house of mourning than a house of feasting, for that is the end of every man, and a living one should take it to heart." So Qoheleth is suggesting that it's good for us to go to a house of mourning. I mean, we know it's a good thing to do. It's a mitzvah. It's a good deed to go and give comfort to someone who is mourning. So, on that hand, it is a better thing to do than to go to a place of feasting. But he further suggests that it is an opportunity for us to reflect on our lives and to remember that, yes, indeed, our time on this earth is limited and we never know what day we will be taken. So it's best to live every day in the knowledge of that, not in a fearful way, but in just a realistic way that, yes, our end is going to come. And when that end comes, we want to be remembered in a good way, and we want to take with us the sum of good deeds, which vastly, we hope, outnumber the poor choices that we've made in this life. There's more sayings about the face being sad, the heart be glad, wise men are drawn to the house of mourning. So I'm gonna skip over a little bit of this. There's an interesting verse here. Verse 6, it says, "For the levity of the fool is like the crackling of nettles under a kettle." In English, that actually rhymes. And I think that's an effort to echo, in a sense, the Hebrew, which is also, it's a play on words. So in Hebrew, nettles, or it's like thorns, is sirin, and the kettle is seer. So two different words, two different meanings, but very similar words. And I kind of like this saying. So the levity of the fool is like the crackling of nettles under a kettle. So if you put just like thorns or teeny little twigs under a kettle and burn them, what's going to happen? Well, they're not going to give off very much heat, and your kettle is not going to get hot. So this is really a way of saying that the levity of fools is hevel. It's without significance. It's without any sort of functional purpose. That was kind of a clever little saying. Well, here's a nice one too. Verse 8. The end of a matter or a thing is better than the beginning of it. All right? The end of a matter is better than the beginning of it. So that, in a way, echoes that death is better than birth. And so he now enlarges that for all matters in life. It's better to be done with something, to have gone through it, than it is to be at the beginning. Now, I think we could all think of things where, gosh, I don't know if I could apply that wisdom to all circumstances in my life. I think of when my children were young, and I miss that. I miss having my kids around. So, I mean, I'm glad they're adults where they are in their lives now, but boy, that was a pretty good time, and sometimes I think it would be fun to go back. All right, better a patient spirit than a haughty spirit. Okay, patience versus haughtiness. Now, in Hebrew, the word patient, better, it's actually a long spirit, a long ruach. And a haughty spirit is a tall spirit, tall ruach. So what's that? So patience takes the long view. God's time is not our time, as we discussed in class, that sometimes things don't happen when we would like them to. But this idea of a tall spirit, it almost reminds me like the Tower of Babel. We're trying to lift ourselves up and empower ourselves to control a situation. Whereas we are not in control, ultimately. We do have choices that we can make, but ultimately we are not in control. And that is certainly one of the things that Qoheleth tells us, that under the sun where we live, Techat HaShemayim, we don't have full knowledge. We don't really understand God's ways. We don't really understand what this is all about. So to try to lift ourselves up and be haughty and be the ones who are in control, rather than someone who has the long patience to see things through. I think that's very, very nice. Verse 9, don't let your spirit be quickly vexed, For vexation abides in the breasts of fools. So, in other words, be slow to anger. Don't fly off the handle. There's a lot of sayings in the book of Proverbs cautioning against anger and reactivity, really, we would say in today's lingo. And I'm sure we've all spoken quickly when we didn't mean to. That was certainly something I've had to learn over my life. Here, verse 10. Don't say, how has it happened that former times were better than these? For it is not wise of you to ask that question. How has it happened that former times were better than... Oh, the good old days. The good old days were so good. And today, oh my gosh, it's just going down the tubes. Well, he says it's not wise of us to ask that question. Doesn't this just sound like something that's so current today? So one way that we talked about interpreting that is, it doesn't help to look back. And we tend to remember things oftentimes bathed in a golden light of unreality. And it certainly can take us out of the joy of the present moment. All right? So if we spend our time looking back at a past that we perceive to be so much better than today, it can almost take away not only the pleasure of the moment, but our incentive to work in this moment and to keep growing and learning and being positive about our lives and about the world and looking with compassion. As Qoheleth told us earlier, look with compassion on the oppressed. There's plenty to do today, so we don't need to spend our time looking back. Such a wise man. I would like to meet him very, very much and see who's the real Qoheleth. All right, let's skip up to verse 13. Consider God's doing. So now we're going to think about God a little bit. Who can straighten what he has twisted? So in a time of good fortune, enjoy good fortune. And in a time of misfortune, it was literally a day of evil, reflect. The one no less than the other was God's doing. Oh my goodness. So here we're saying what we can't straighten out what God has twisted. So if things are messed up, see the hand of God in that. In a time of good fortune, enjoy it. Enjoy it for all you can. And in a time of misfortune, think. The one no less than the other is God's doing. All things come from the hand of God. And basically he's saying, don't judge what happens. That's it's kind of like the long patience. And so often it's easy to look to God and thank God in times that are good and give God credit for that. I hope we do. But also, what if we reflected that when the hard times come, this possibly too could be from the hand of God. And what is the purpose of that? Well, I would assume that it's to teach us something. I think that this life is a big school, the school of hard knocks sometimes. And we do see that in the Bible. We're told that the patriarchs were tested so that they could learn and they could grow and hopefully leave this life at the end better than we came into it. Now here's some fun stuff too. He says in verse 16, so don't overdo goodness and don't act the wise man to excess, or you may be dumbfounded. Don't overdo wickedness and don't be a fool, or you may die before your time. Now, so it says don't overdo goodness. Don't be overly zealous and try to just prove how absolutely wonderful you are, and don't try to always be the wise man, the sage or the guru in every situation, because nobody's perfect. Nobody is always good and nobody is always wise. But certainly, on the other hand, don't overdo wickedness. Don't sell yourself into a life of evil doing, and don't be a fool, or you may die before your time. Can you think of examples of people who have made choices that we could call foolish, that has really led them to their demise before their time? I mean, he's suggesting that we can die before our time, and sometimes that's as a result of our own choices. Certainly, in many circumstances, it's not. Diseases happen, accidents happen, but anyway. So Qoheleth says, just take the golden mean, find the middle way, and you will have a happier, more successful life. He goes on to say, for there is not one good man on earth who does what is best and doesn't err. Not one. No one is perfect. And that's so important to remember about other people, that we should be compassionate and forgiving, and about ourselves. Living a life of perfectionism, of having to be right and beating ourselves up when we make a mistake, that gets us nowhere. That's like the looking back. Learn from it. Don't do it again. Turn around, make a difference. And verse 21. Finally, don't pay attention to everything that is said, so you may not hear your slave reviling you. For well you remember the many times you yourself have reviled others. So don't pay attention to everything that's said about you. Because remember, there have been times when you have spoken ill or criticized or mocked somebody else. So don't be surprised when it comes your way. And Qoheleth goes on to talk about all he's studied, and he's tried to apply wisdom to all things in his life. Now we come to another very controversial section of Qoheleth, which, as a woman, I have to be honest, I don't like this one bit. It begins in verse 26. Now I find woman more bitter than death. She is all traps. Her hands are fetters, and her heart is snares. He who is pleasing to God escapes her, and he who is displeasing is caught by her. See, this is what I found, said Qoheleth, item by item in my search for the reason of things. As for what I found further but did not find, what I sought further but did not find, I found only one human being in 1,000, like one true, solid, decent person. And the one I found among so many was never a woman. But, see, this I did find. God made men plain, but they have engaged in too much reasoning. Well, how do we hear this in our modern day context, where we have no sense, or at least I don't, that women are not equal in every way, equally capable of doing whatever it is God calls us to do, whether we be teachers or rabbis or doctors or, parents, whatever we do. I don't see women as being a lot worse than men. Different? Yes, we are different. We're different in our bodies, we're different in our psyches. But to say that women are more bitter than death, now of course, the rabbis over the ages tried to, in a sense, really explain this away, even a long time ago when women's equality was far from the top shelf issue. And one suggestion was that earlier in the book, Qoheleth talks about worries that no one will inherit all the riches that he has amassed. And so the suggestion was that Qoheleth was unsuccessful in ever finding a wife who was pleasing to him. So either that meant that he was too particular, or there was something about him that was displeasing to women. And the suggestion was even that maybe the problem was the attitude that he displays in this passage. So I don't know. I mean, take it in the context of the times, try to explain it away, but you know what? Here it is. And it is what it is, and there's another thing on the question list when I meet Qoheleth someday that I am certainly going to check in about. Chapter 8, we talk about the wise man. Who is the wise man? And this is a pretty little saying here. Let's say woman, a woman's wisdom lights up her face so that her deep discontent is dissembled. So wisdom brings light to the face. And I think it brings light to the world. So whatever discontent we have with life is dispersed. So, and what is wisdom? I think Qoheleth would say it's how we live in this world, how we look at this world, the approach we take to life, remembering that we live under the sun and we're not going to have complete knowledge. So in a sense, wisdom is not overachieving for wisdom or perfection, but it's being genuine and real and living in the moment. I think that's wisdom. So now he talks quite a bit about the king, about obeying orders and oaths before the king, that the king can be quite dangerous and dangers to us in our life. A wise man will bear in mind that there is a time of doom, for there's a time for every experience. Where did we hear that before? Chapter 3, right? For there's a time for every experience, including the doom. For a man's calamity overwhelms him. Indeed, he does not know what is happening. Even when it is on the point of happening, who can tell him? No man has authority over the life breath. To hold back the life breath, there is no authority over the day of death. There's no mustering out from that war. Even wickedness is powerless to save the owner. So Qoheleth spends a lot of time focusing, and we're going to hear about this next week too, that this day of death is inevitable. Now, some have seen him as unhealthily obsessed with death, but I think at the end of his wisdom, this is where he has come out, that in this inevitability, and it's in the light of this inevitability that we have to live every day. And would we make it different if we could? Maybe, but that's kind of a pointless point to contemplate because, we've got the trite saying, it is what it is. And I tell you, friends, that this is what it is, So not much we can do about it. At the end, we can't control that. What we can control is what we do today, the quality of our life in this moment. Then he goes on to talk, as he has before, the injustice that he perceives in this world, the fact that the sentence imposed for evil deeds is not executed swiftly, which emboldens men to do evil. A sinner may do evil 100 times and his punishment is still delayed. Yeah, we certainly see that. We certainly see injustice in this world where those who appear to be the evildoers, although we've already learned that no one's all good and no one's all bad, but those who are criminals or make their living from taking advantage of others or acting in inappropriate ways, who bully others or claw their way to the top, their punishment may not come in this lifetime, Qoheleth tells us. And that is part of the reality with which we live. So the long patience is what we must have, and not let our sense of outrage overtake our sense of joy. All right. And again, we get a happy bottom line here from Qoheleth in chapter 15 of verse 8. I therefore praised enjoyment. For the only good a man can have under the sun is to eat and drink and enjoy himself. That much can accompany him in exchange for his wealth throughout the days of the life that God has granted him under the sun. So here's where we live. God has granted us our days. Qoheleth says, relax, enjoy, take it easy. So he tells us again, he set his mind to learn wisdom, observe the business that goes on in the world, even to the extent of going without sleep day and night. He has observed all that God brings to pass. So as he observes the world, he sees the hand of God behind all things. Indeed, man cannot even guess the events that occur under the sun, for man tries strenuously but fails to guess them. And even if a sage should think to discover them, he would not be able to guess them. So Qoheleth says he tried. He stayed up day and night to try to figure out what's afoot in this world. And even he, the greatest sage, was unable to do so. In light of that, I think that I will say goodbye for now. Shalom, peace. Have a wonderful week, and I'm going to go make myself a nice cup of tea.